Hello and welcome to the Did You Know Crypto podcast. Today we're going to be talking about Namecoin, the first altcoin, its failure, and why that has a lesson for the entire Bitcoin space. First, I'd really appreciate it if you'd go over to iTunes and leave a 5-star and written review. It helps immensely with the podcast getting its name out there. If you want to help any other way, go over to supportmypodcast.com. Gives all the other ways that you can help out, from shopping through our Amazon link. It costs you nothing, but just gives a little kickback. So please bookmark that Amazon link, shop through there. Also, you can send us Bitcoin through monthly donations, very much like Patreon, through Bitbacker. So just head on over there, look at all the different ways you can help out. Most of them cost you absolutely nothing. But most of all, thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Welcome to the Did You Know Crypto podcast. Today, I am joined by nobody but myself, and I'm actually going to be doing the first standalone episode that it's been a while. It's probably been 9 months or so since I did one. I've been meaning to do more of these, but I just haven't had time to do it, really, to kind of write out the outlines of what I want to talk about and do the research on them. But Namecoin was one. Or I was originally starting it off as just kind of do a history of the altcoin, like the early history, and then the first one, Namecoin being it. But I actually, when I was doing the research on it, I decided to kind of shift it. And I want to talk about Namecoin, but also its implications for this space, its implications for crypto in general and Bitcoin too, even though it was a failed coin. So this was actually, like I said, the first altcoin, and it's probably something most of you have never heard of. This is not because it's some sort of, hipster coin or anything like that, but it's, by today's standards, or really any day's standards, it's pretty much a dead, comatose coin. It only has about $11.7 million US dollars in market cap. And it's worth about 79 cents. And when I was doing the research, this was late January of 2019. So it's probably roughly about the same when you hear this coming up and next week on the 11th of February. But, it was released in April of 2011, and this is really barely 2 years into Bitcoin's life. And it was a fork of Bitcoin, meaning that with forks, it had an indistinguishable history up with Bitcoin up until the point that they actually forked. But after the split, it has its own unique, ledger of transactions, right? So after that fork, there's transactions on Bitcoin and transactions on that fork, and they don't match up. Prior to that, they had the same one. This is the same for Bitcoin Cash, and Bitcoin that happened in August of 2017. Prior to that, they had the same exact transactions. After that, they have different transactions. Like Bitcoin, it also uses SHA-256 and proof of work and produces blocks every 10 minutes. But its purpose diverts completely from Bitcoin and basically the concept of a currency. Its aim was to create a decentralized alternative to the domain name system, or DNS, as we call it, which is basically kind of like the phone book of the internet. And this is currently administered. The domain name system is administered by the let me look at my notes here. Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, or ICANN. I'll just refer to it as ICANN from here on out, which is a centralized service, right? If you've ever bought a domain or created a website, if you haven't, I should say, this is kind of seem alien terminology. I didn't know the full name. I just always knew it as ICANN from buying and selling websites and doing DNS registers and stuff like that. But basically how this works is like you want to buy a website, or how the DNS web system works is that every system, computer, site, everything like that on the internet, it has a unique identifier that allows it to connect or be connected to, the IP address. ICANN creates, basically what they do is they create the policy that regulates these unique identifiers. So basically all the .nets, .orgs, .coms, .biz, all these sorts of things are all regulated by ICANN. Originally, it was a U.S. company, or was run by the U.S. government. Then they basically created a corporation that's no longer under U.S. control, and it was kind of a touchy subject for a while because people felt like the U.S. should keep control of it, but that's more of a political thing. We don't really need to go into that. But say you want to create a domain, didyouknowcrypto.com, which you should go to. Well, you hop on over to, say, someone like HostGator, GoDaddy, Squarespace, wherever. And I use HostGator, and this is a hosting service that I use. And you can go to their domain search, and you can search for a domain, and you see if it's available. And if it is, you can purchase it through that domain register service, like HostGator or GoDaddy. And basically, you're buying the rights to own that specific name. It's kind of like, it's not quite renting property because you technically own that as long as your registration, it's kind of like running a business per se. Like, you own that business as long as you keep the paperwork up to date and everything, then you're good to go. Then you can keep on, using it and everything like that. But that does not mean, though, that, as we've seen with some of the censorship stuff going on, that just because you own it doesn't mean that your website's going to stay up. If a hosting domain service wants to dump you, then that can cause problems. But anyways, that's kind of the reason for Namecoin, right? And once you buy that property per se, or the rights to that property for a specific time, it's registered with ICANN, and you're all good to go. So the domain name service DNS is what allows for something like didyouknowcrypto.com or google.com or Facebook, whatever. It's something that's easily understood by you or I because it's in our native language, right? And there's different ones with different languages, of course, too. But it's something easily understood by you and I, but it allows it to be translated into the computer-friendly IP address. So the long string of numbers that, separated by dots is actually the address to your website, but the DNS service allows it to be translated into, it allows it to be easily read by both computers and us. So it's not a one or the other. What Namecoin was basically trying to do was circumvent ICANN by creating its own .bit, B-I-T, DNS service. So in theory, the idea is let's say a totalitarian dictator gain control of ICANN, or they get, let's say they gain control of their country and they were able to put immense pressure or pay off people in ICANN, and they could censor people in that countries or people around the world's ability to reach sites that were run and owned by dissidents or opponents of theirs. So let's say you typed in freedomfromthedictator.com, right? And ICANN had censored it. No one could view it. So what Namecoin was trying to do was basically stop that from ever happening. So if you actually had that same address, say freedomfromthedictator.bit, B-I-T, no one could stop you from connecting to it. I mean, this is in theory. So today, or I shouldn't say it's in theory. I mean, there's a little bit more nuance to that, but basically, in theory, that's what they were trying to accomplish. Freedom from, censorship is something that is becoming extremely important today, and will continue. It's going to be a continuing theme in the culture as this pendulum swings both sides. And now both sides really recognize that censorship is a more viable tactic. Or I should say, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. I don't want to get deep into a political diatribe, but, we kind of saw a more conservative viewpoint being the ones that were leading the charge on censorship decades ago. In the 90s, though, we kind of had this 90s into late 90s, 2000s. There was this real, as the kind of religious right's ability to influence politics waned, as society got a lot more quote unquote progressive on social topics for the most part. There was this kind of like a period there where censorship kind of was on the run. And now we've seen the culture switch, where now we've swung so far, in my view, to the progressive side, now that there are people who are seeing that they kind of now have the microphone and the soapbox and the power. They are starting to see the need to censor. It's not to say that conservatives aren't censoring as well, but you're seeing a lot more of the conservative voices being censored. You're seeing liberal or progressive voices too, but you're kind of basically seeing anybody on the really far left and anyone on the center right to far right being censored. And you can argue whether or not they should be, but personally, to me, I don't think that censorship is ever good. I think it only drives people underground and makes things a lot more dangerous than they ever would be if people with bad ideas were allowed to speak their bad ideas in public, be publicly challenged, versus being able to adopt a martyr mentality and attract people who have also been disenfranchised with society and identify with them as being fellow martyrs. I mean, that's why we always see these kind of fringe extremist organizations pop up. You can't censor people technically by trying to like pass a law, in the United States at least. But you can use social pressure on social media platforms, which is basically where people's existence lies nowadays. And if you can deplatform somebody, get them off Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, they really don't exist to society, right? And I understand there's a lot of people who go like, well, you know, I live off grid and all that. And I identify with that as being a very quality way of living, but this doesn't affect them. We're talking about the 85% of society that this does affect. So the initial aims of Namecoin were great, but their ability to deliver and understand the requirements for adoption was basically how Namecoin died. Initially, it received, a lot of excitement. It was the first altcoin. We all remember the ICOs of 2017, how excited everybody was for all these, new projects, and it's going to do this and they're going to do that. And so you can imagine that there was a lot of excitement in some sector, a lot of sectors of the Bitcoin aficionado, crypto aficionados. Actually, it was just Bitcoin at the time, going like, oh, okay, well, yeah, okay, we've now decentralized money. Why don't we decentralize this? So many people thought this would be the next wave of the web, following Bitcoin's, footsteps of decentralized money. We could take the first steps into a decentralized internet. We had hundreds of thousands of domains have been registered on Namecoin for .bit addresses. But now, like 4 some odd years later, barely a handful have ever actually been developed. I think it's like 30 to 40 or something like that. And most of these domains are just being squatted on, hoping that the .bit domain, would become popular, and this virtual real estate that they're holding on to would increase. So it's the same way. It works for .coms, it works for .orgs, it works for .nets. It works for all these regular ones that run through ICANN. Is that, I've done it before. I've found a domain and gone like, oh, I think this is actually going to be something that people are going to want. I sit on it for a couple of years, and sometimes people come by and they go, hey, it's something I paid 20 some odd bucks in registration fees for a couple of years, they buy for a couple hundred, or one I actually sold for a couple thousand, which was pretty cool. Interestingly, it was actually didyouknowshow.com. I don't know why this guy wanted it that bad, but I hadn't actually done anything with it. I thought about developing a podcast on it, and that's actually where I came up with the name Did You Know Crypto, because, well, I'm not going to go into that background of that, because it doesn't have anything to do with this podcast. But anyways, I was going to do a podcast on kind of like did you know topics, and then I sold it. And then when I was going to do my Bitcoin one, kind of re-engage with that idea. So anyway, so people sit on these and hoping that they're going to sell. So I mean, there's people that were probably sitting on, Bitcoin.bit and Litecoin.bit or whatever, and, Google.bit. So, this is quite common. The squatting and kind of rushing in is quite common for any kind of emerging tech sector. Much of the first waves of interest in any new technology are always usually speculators. You have the actual diehards who believe in it. And then once those people kind of elevate this, and I talked about this with Emily Coleman on my last episode 23, where we talked about the stories that bind us and about the different waves, right? What's going to be the next wave of adoption is that the first wave, and definitely with Bitcoin, it was developers, it was people. And then in the next wave was kind of political, non-developer folks. And so with these emerging tech sectors usually have some diehards, usually in a lot of ways with Bitcoin, because it was decentralized, it was kind of community that built up around. And sometimes you have that with startups as well, but startups are usually the people who are dedicated to this idea. And then once they build up enough of the tech to gain interest, then the speculators come in. And whether that's VCs, whether that's, whoever's willing to give them a few bucks, whether that's people that have access to the technology, if it's available to start building themselves on this. These first waves are usually people who are speculators, who are going like, I'm willing to invest my time and or money because I think there's going to be a payoff. Now, a lot of times that payoff is money. Sometimes that payoff, I think, and this more aptly fits Bitcoin, that payoff is a political end that we're trying to achieve. And these speculators, if this is your, when it's your first time speculating, you usually in for a rude awakening, which a lot of us have been in cycles in Bitcoin, depending on when you got in, is that more often than not, you actually miss than you actually swing and get a hit. So to go back though a little bit, squatting was I was saying there's a lot of these .bit domain names being squatted on, but that was not the issue with this endeavor. Well, if it actually started to become more popular, it could have slowed down progress, right? Because you had all these people squatting on it and nobody able to build on it unless they wanted to pay. But those who came first do deserve the profit because they took the risk. Being a first mover. I mean, everyone talks about first mover advantage. First mover advantage is great if the thing works out. If it doesn't, you're now the one holding the bag of losing money. So, and right here with Namecoin and the .bit domains, we can kind of see the pitfalls of being that first mover, of being that speculator, of being that person that takes that risk, is that you take that risk, and if you lose, now you're the one holding a .bit domain that you probably bought, that you paid for in Namecoin coin, that you probably bought by trading Bitcoin for Namecoin, which you probably, even though that Namecoin thing probably cost you maybe 20, 30 bucks over the years in Namecoin, you probably lost out on thousands of dollars, if not more, in Bitcoin that value was. So this is kind of a lesson in why capitalism is so important, and why the hatred towards people in that are speculators, or they can wreak havoc, people who have money, who are willing to risk capital, whether they're venture capitalists, whether they're just wealthy people, is that because they have that money, they are able to risk it. Because they're able to risk $1 million 10 times, losing 9 million, but in one of those 10 times, one of those $1 million investments turns into 50. And it doesn't always either. You could just lose 10 million. So people like me and people like most of you listening don't have that kind of money laying around to be able to invest. But people who do are able to, and they do reap the profits, but they also take all the risks. We don't. We just get to use the product. So going back to a little bit, what I was saying was that the squatting and all that was not the problem. The actual problem, and this is a very common one in the Bitcoin crypto world, is what I would call, and I know some people will absolutely hate this, it's developer centrism. And I shouldn't have to say this, but some people are just listening the first time. Some people don't know me. Some people are not going to go back and listen to all my other episodes. So I am not anti-developer. I don't know how to speak the language that they speak. That is the language of the internet, and that is the language of Bitcoin. And I really am, and I'm not just saying this just to try to go, well, I'm going to use a bunch of like positive language and then shit on them. That's apologies. Sorry. I don't have to bleep that part out. I'm not going to use a bunch of flowery language and then hate on them. So I'm not doing this to like preface it. What I'm actually trying to say is that I am in awe of what they can do. I'm actually trying to learn to code myself, and it's really hard. So I really respect someone who has the kind of abilities that these guys do. But, and I just broke my own rule that there's kind of a saying that you can ignore what anybody says before they say but. So like saying like, I'm not against American food, but usually you can just disregard everything they said before. But what I'm really trying to say is there's a reason that so many developer rich and marketing poor companies fail, and also why I guess marketing rich companies fail, and to take the opposite side, which we can see if you look at a marketing rich company, that would be like the Fire Festival, which I'm pretty sure everybody's heard of it. You haven't, just Google FYRE, nothing else. FYRE, it'll take you to everything you want to know. Because this was an idea that was created by somebody who was great at marketing. I mean, he was definitely a scammer, totally, and a thief, and should be in jail. But he had no eye to actually development. And in this case, for Fire Festival, it's a music festival. It's actual physical development and deployment of an actual festival and the physical stuff that's necessary for that. And it became the most infamous failure scam in music festival history. And this is what happens when you have too many marketers and not enough actual operators or developers. Hey folks, I hope that you're enjoying this episode as much as we are. I don't have any sponsors, so if you could go over to supportmypodcast.com, you'll see all the different ways that you can support the podcast, from Amazon links to a bunch of other stuff. You could back us on Bitbacker with crypto, but most of all, if you can go to iTunes and leave a 5-star and a written review, it'd be very, very helpful. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the show. And with Namecoin and a lot of the other crypto products out there, they are way too developer heavy because, this space, Bitcoin, it was born out of the cypherpunk and coder world. And these people, for the most part, think alike, and being the early movers are the ones, mostly the ones in charge of the projects and companies in the space, because they either, they have the know-how, they have the experience. They also have the capital in the space because they were in earlier, and their Bitcoin's worth a lot more now, so they're able to deploy that. But the problem with this is that this is a generalized statement. But from what from my experience, is that developers, by their nature, and once again, generally speaking, they're not very savvy in terms of understanding consumer demands. Now, they may understand consumer demands maybe within the niche of the space as it is right now, which when we're talking about even just tech savvy American culture, Bitcoin takes up this space. So if you're going, well, this is what consumers need here, and thinking that's going to apply to here, I might be wrong. But I think the proof is kind of in the pudding right now, where that is not true. They're not good with understanding general consumer demands and the importance of aesthetics and putting UX and UI as being one of the most important aspect of a project. And a lot of developers are going, no, the tech and the code. If the code doesn't work, the project doesn't work, the project doesn't work, nobody's going to want to use it. Yes, I understand. But the problem is, like, if you have no eye towards the aesthetic, no eye towards the UX, then things get really goofy and people don't want to use your product. And there's a kind of a social theory that there's kind of like in every society, and whether that's society as society at large, whether it's a movement, or a company or whatever, that there's always this struggle between conservatives and liberals, and the ultimate goal is the progress of that society. Now, conservatives and liberals will have different ideas of the progress, but the idea is to make it better than it was before, make it more successful in whatever metric that they're measuring it in. If the pendulum swings too far to the liberals, things can descend into chaos, as the machinations that keep the society functioning get destroyed because they're basically ignored. They're not thought of as important. The foundations of society that conservatives usually have their eyes on, they become, things become unworkable. If things go to the right too far, conservatives become, they make society so rigid, no progress can be made. Things stagnate, and the society, company, whatever we're talking about, atrophies into non-existence. And this is, once again, a generalization, right? So there's always the, well, I know a guy, or I know this company, and then they don't do this at all, and they're really good about that. Great. Super. Not talking about them. But I usually kind of see the developers as the conservatives, and they're focused on the underpinnings of that society, of this movement. They're obsessing whether over every tiny detail is functioning correctly, while the liberal side, I would kind of call that more the marketing side. They understand that to progress, they need to gain more converts to their cause, enlarge the society, enlarge the movement. And they need to, I don't want to say make it more palatable, because that almost seems like you're diluting the message, making it impure, right? And you don't want to do that either, to a point. But what liberals understand is that if you want to progress, you have to make things more easily understood. You have to speak their language. However, if they're, like I said, they're given too much control, they focus on making people feel good about that society, or making people in the society feel good, and everyone's happy. Let's not be too rigid, but underneath their feet, the roads are crumbling, right? The foundations are crumbling, and things can get really bad. And to me, with Namecoin, like so many projects, I'm not talking about like just a handful, but like the majority, if not almost all projects in this space, they have no eye towards adoption. Their wallets are ugly and difficult to use. Now, I'm not talking about every project. So some will have some nice ones, but for the most part, they don't. A lot of projects will have one or all of these problems. The wallets, which is one of the main ways that people interact with your blockchain, is through your wallet. They're ugly. They're difficult to use. Namecoin had basically no tutorials at all. Like if you were like, oh, I want to download a name, I want to get some Namecoin and I want to start my own .bit address. How do I download? Okay, they go and they download the wallet. They can't figure it out. There's no like Google, there's no going on YouTube and find the tutorial. It wasn't until much later that just people in the community did that. The developers were focusing on the project. I'm not saying that they were being lazy and not doing anything. Like they didn't understand that this was something important. Like they got it, right? Bitcoin developers would understand it as well. But the average person who's going like, oh, this is cool tech, I want to try this, could not figure it out. They were trying to basically create every little bit of functionality that they thought could ever be necessary, ever be used. And it really wasn't needed. Like all this kind of functionality and details that they were focusing on, I should say additional functionality past kind of the base necessary stuff, it wasn't needed in this building stage that they were, early on in the project. And probably most of it, or a good chunk of it, probably was never going to be necessary to the majority of the users, right? So developers have often worked solely with other developers. Like they've hung out in those circles for the majority of their lives. Kids who got into coding and programming, earlier in their teens, kind of hung out with those kids, and then they went to college, and they if they went to college, then they hung out with computer science people, and they kind of all hung out in those circles. And they often live like most of us do, right? So people that are interested in history kind of hang out with other history geeks, and especially with the internet, you go on, history. I was going to say history forum boards. Tells you how I'm dating myself, but you go on different circles and Facebook groups and all that other kind of stuff that's focused on that sort of stuff. Probably dating myself also by calling it a Facebook group. But anyways, you get the gist of what I'm saying. We all kind of hang out in our own circles. We get in these bubbles. I really try to personally go out, and I literally will look up why Bitcoin doesn't work or anti-Bitcoin articles, and I'll read more about those people to get their perspective. I'll talk to people that I know, but it's good to get out of that bubble. So, but going back to developers being in a bubble, when developers are creating something, especially in a lot of these early tech startups, and definitely within the crypto space and Bitcoin space, most of these companies are mostly just all developers as well. And they do a great job of creating projects that other developers would love. But that is, in many cases, the opposite of what the majority of the public would love and find to be useful. Once again, I really am not trying to crap on developers, but if this space was dominated by marketers and all that kind of stuff, in 2017, I wouldn't say it's dominated by marketers. It was dominated by snake oil salesmen and BS artists who came into this space because they saw able to make a quick buck. So there is validity to that statement as well. But for the most part, all the various stuff that people are really serious about, they're all pretty much developer led. So I'm not trying to crap on developers and say, you guys are terrible and you're holding us back. It's not that, but I'm trying to bring some self-awareness to the space so that people can help, kind of understand that adoption is not going to be the perfect utopian ideal that developers think that it will be. And so I'm not saying that the root of the failure for adoption, so even in the 2017, marketing scammy stuff, they didn't even have good UX or UI either. Like they were just selling keywords, and that was it. They really didn't even have any tech to back it up. So they didn't even get that part of the equation right. But I personally feel, and I've talked about this in multiple interviews, that the next wave of adoption is going to be led by those who focus on consumers. And this is not necessarily marketers, but those who understand the consumer best. And a hill that I'm willing to die on is that until we make Bitcoin something that is easier for the average person out there, easier for them to use than their debit card, and we make it that natural path of least resistance, we will never see mass adoption. Consumers are lazy. They value ease over they value ease of use over everything else. Security doesn't matter, right? So, I am a consumer. Now, could I probably save a little bit more money here and there if I was willing to spend a couple hours, going around on the internet, finding the exact cheapest price plus shipping, and all this kind of stuff, than just going on Amazon and doing click, click, click and ordering it? Yeah. But to me, history has taught me that Amazon's a pretty good product. They have pretty cheap prices, and I am willing to take the chance that maybe something's a little bit more expensive for that ease of use and saving of my time. I am a lazy consumer. Amazon has won the game, and has won the game for a lot of people, not just me, because they've made it the path of least resistance, and that's why they have seen mass adoption. So generally speaking, most people would rather have something that works for 3 months at $1 than something that works for 10 years at $3, right? Because they will trade security, freedom, and money for time and ease. So what I mean to say is they would take something that only works for 3 months for $1, but is really quick and easy to set up, than something that I say, well, it's a little bit more hard, it's a little bit more difficult, but it's the cost of, it's only $3 for 10 years, not $1 3 months. You're going to spend more than that in 1 year, but it's a little bit more difficult. You have to do this. You have to do this. Most people will go like, that's fine. I don't care. I'm gonna spend more money. I don't want to have to deal with this, right? They are going to trade all those things for ease of use. The reason that we are seeing incandescent light bulb, let's take that. So those of you on the live stream can probably see this. This is a LED bulb. So this LED bulb is shining on me right now. Prior to that, it was actually, would have been an incandescent bulb probably about 10 years ago. And incandescent was just a little filament, and it heated up when electricity was passed through it, and it made light. So when the climate change thing started to kind of come into the public sphere, there was a bunch of knee-jerk reactions to like, well, we got to do this and we got to do that to make things, one of the things like, well, how do we make things more energy efficient? Light bulbs, right? Everyone had always complained about making the longer lasting light bulb, right? So what they decided to do in Congress was pass a law. Incandescents are going to be phased out. Incandescents are going to be phased out over a period of time, and you won't be able to use them anymore. What are you going to get to use? CFLs, those little compact fluorescents, those squiggly ones everyone hated. That if you break them, they spread mercury powder everywhere, which is great for landfills and all that. So thank you. So we had to deal with these light bulbs that nobody liked, that were ugly, that put more pollution into the ground. And what happened? LEDs kind of came on the market, but they were really expensive. But now, shoot, I can go pick up a 6-pack of LEDs for $1 a piece or less. And now everything in my house, and most of the people I know all just go buy LEDs now. They're not necessarily like, I pretty much have all LEDs in my house because as things burnt out, I just replaced them with it. Because it's the path of least resistance. We're doing the right thing without even thinking about it. That's when you get adoption. Whoever in Bitcoin captures that consumer motive the best is going to win big. So it's just kind of an advice out there. Look who is really focusing on capturing the motives, or understanding the motives of consumers and capturing that in their product. So, Namecoin is still around. You can visit it at namecoin.org, and there's actually still activity on GitHub. That's a site that projects use to have people submit code, and then it gets committed to the actual code base and becomes a part of that active project. The latest commit on Namecoin was merged for February of 2019, which was 3 days ago as of this recording. I'm recording this on 7th February 2019. So it's not dead. There's still people contributing, but you can usually tell when a project is dead or dying or almost dead when there's no commits. There haven't been any commits in 6 months or a year or whatever, or it's just a few of them. And Namecoin seems to be kind of the latter. There's not a lot of commits. But I thought it was important to talk about Namecoin because it's a cautionary tale that we haven't learned from. At least I think that we haven't learned from it yet. And that many others following in this space haven't learned quite yet. So, this also, one side of it's I'm talking about marketing and focusing on consumer-driven stuff. But it also, the other hand too, is kind of this idea of blockchain right? And this leads into a little bit of self-reflection on my part in particular. And using in that, this self-reflection is related to using the word blockchain as kind of this panacea for the world's social and technological problems, right? We could use blockchain for this, blockchain for that, blockchain for this, blockchain for that, right? And you go back 18 months and blockchain was going to be used for everything, right? We were going to stop ivory trade with blockchain. We're going to stop piracy with blockchain. We're going to stop human sex trafficking with blockchain. We were going to eliminate inefficiencies in the logistics. And there are there applications, sure, but it kind of got overblown, and part of myself got caught up in this because I didn't really do my homework that well. I came into Bitcoin in 2013, but shamefully, I realized that until the last 2 years, I really have not done extremely deep dives into understanding this tech. And really, when it comes down to it, blockchain is an extremely inefficient ledger, right? It's a really bad Excel spreadsheet. Or I should say bad. It's an inefficient, right? It's a highly energy intensive Excel spreadsheet. But the reason that it's so important for something like Bitcoin, for something like, for something like our money, is that this high intensive energy use to secure the chain, to verify transactions, means that the more energy that it takes to secure the chain, the more secure the chain is. Because it takes that much more energy to attack it, that much more energy to make your money less secure. For money that makes sense, to make sure that a Connex box is tracked from Atlanta to Algiers is not that important, right? And to use a blockchain that's centralized and go, well, then if you just centralize it, then you could just have a private blockchain, a permission blockchain. If it's centralized, then you've given up the whole point of a decentralized proof of work blockchain, is that if it's decentralized, it's harder to attack. If it's centralized, you've now centralized the weak points in that system. So it defeats the whole purpose. I'm not saying that there's not things to be used within a permission blockchain. I haven't completely written off permission blockchains quite yet, but I'm kind of more leaning towards that more than not. And probably the next year, as I do more reading, I'll probably end up leaning that way. But as of right now, since I haven't read enough to become fully invested in that viewpoint, I'm not willing to make that determination. So to me, a lot of these blockchain applications are not useful at all. That for right now, and I don't think necessarily that a decentralized DNS service couldn't be useful to stop censorship. Maybe we could determine that it's worthwhile in society. Maybe not. But I don't think that it approaches the value that we find with money. Money is the ultimate freedom of speech. The ability for you to transact with whoever you want, whenever you want, without being told you can't, or I should say you can be told that you can, but without being disallowed to. That as long as both people control their own private keys, nobody can stop you. Unless they physically lock you up, right? Or kill you, right? But you can do that with any system, right? That if you kill somebody, it kind of stops any system other than an idea. So this kind of idea of blockchain being the fix for all our problems, I think is way overblown. And I think that we are seeing that peak of it's going to solve everything. And now a lot of that stuff has died off. And I think that money is the killer app for blockchain. I'm not saying that there's no other projects out there that can't find a use for it, but right now I haven't seen anything that's as important as money. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope that you enjoyed listening to a few of my thoughts on the subject. If you have any more questions or anything like that, head over to didyouknowcrypto.com. I'll have all the notes, all the websites that I mentioned, everything like that. If you would like to help out, go over to supportmypodcast.com. It has all the ways you can support. But the biggest way really is go over to iTunes, leave a 5-star review, leave a written review as well. That helps so much in getting this podcast out there. Please share, or like and subscribe to us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. All of our social media stuff is at didyouknowcrypto.com. I really appreciate you guys, listening, supporting us. So I guess it's just me for right now, but supporting me, I really, really, really do appreciate it.